Would we be killed? Thousands of Native American children were taken from their families and sent to boarding schools to learn the ways of the white man. This is their story, by Lauren Tarshish. Was 12-year-old Oda Kute going to be killed? The year was 1879, and Oda Kute, a member of the Lakota Sioux Indian tribe, was riding on a train with 83 other Sioux children. They had left their families and their reservations in the vast Dakota Plains and were traveling east to a mysterious land called Pennsylvania. Watching over them was a white man in a U.S. Army uniform. Oda Kute's father had told him that this white soldier was taking the children to a school in the east. But Oda Kute was sure the white man had tricked his father. The older boys on the train said they were being taken to the place where the sun rises, and that when they arrived, the white soldier would take the Sioux children and throw them off the edge of the earth. Oda Kute did not totally believe the boys. He did believe one thing, though: never trust a white man. White people had been bringing harm to Oda Kute's people for longer than Oda Kute had been alive. First came the settlers who seized their lands. Then came the white man's diseases, smallpox, tuberculosis, measles, which wiped out entire villages. Finally came the soldiers with their guns and cannons, and the endless wars that left both Native Americans and white men dead in the prairie grass. Oda Kute kept a close eye on this white soldier as the train chugged east. How had he convinced Oda Kute's father and the Sioux chiefs to send their children away? And what did he really want with Oda Kute? Kill the Indian. The soldier was U.S. Army Captain Henry Pratt, and he believed he was saving Oda Kute. America's Indian tribes were in dire trouble. A century earlier, an estimated 1.5 million native people had lived across the territories that would become the United States. There were hundreds of unique tribes, from the Pequot in the east, who fished and farmed in bustling seaside villages, to the Shasta of the Northwest, whose sturdy dugout canoes plied the rivers and streams in the dense and rainy forests of present-day Oregon. Oda Kute's Sioux ancestors had flourished across the sweeping Great Plains. By 1879, settlers and the U.S. Army had forced most tribes off their lands, and white man diseases had devastated the native population. America's 250,000 remaining Native Americans were living on reservations, barely surviving on food and cast-off clothes provided by the U.S. government. Pratt was deeply troubled by their plight and by the poor education offered at reservation schools. He believed that Native American children deserved a quality education, so he came up with a plan. First, he convinced the U.S. government to turn an abandoned Pennsylvania Army barracks into the Carlisle School, America's first boarding school for Native American children, and offered to run the school himself. He then traveled to the Sioux reservations to convince the chiefs to send their children. Understandably, the chiefs were suspicious of Pratt, a soldier for the very army that had driven them off their lands and broken one treaty after another. Ultimately, though, the chiefs agreed that the best hope for their people was education. So they gathered up 84 children, including Oda Kute, and sent them east with Pratt. But Pratt hadn't told the chiefs everything. It was not Pratt's plan to simply educate these children and teach them English. He also planned to civilize them, to strip them of their traditions and ways of life. Pratt believed that the children needed to completely abandon their Indianness in order to succeed in America. Kill the Indian, save the man, was Pratt's saying. Perhaps Oda Kute was right to be wary. After all, Captain Pratt did intend to kill part of Oda Kute, the Sioux part, and this way Pratt thought he would help Oda Kute survive. Luther Standing Bear. The changes began the moment Oda Kute stepped through the iron gates of Carlisle. All the students were given Christian first names. Oda Kute was given the name Luther. As for a last name, school officials usually translated each child's Indian name into English. But Oda Kute's name meant plenty kills, which was considered too savage. So Oda Kute took his father's name, which is how Oda Kute became Luther Standing Bear. Along with his new name came a new look. His long hair was cut short, his leggings and moccasins were taken away, replaced by an itchy wool uniform and black leather boots that squeaked with every step. He began to learn English and to say Christian prayers. He went to classes and did his chores. At night, Luther heard children around him sobbing in their beds. He missed his family, too. He thought of what his father had told him, that he was like a Sioux warrior fighting for the future of his people. Visitors from the U.S. government were impressed by Carlisle. They marveled at the girls in long woolen dresses and pulled-back hair, working at their sewing machines, at the boys with their military haircuts and neatly pressed trousers sitting obediently in their classes. "We have solved the Indian problem," wrote one government agent after visiting Carlisle. "These children are thriving." But were they? What was it really like for these children, some only 4 or 5 years old, to be sent so far away from their families and their ways of life? In fact, many children became profoundly homesick or rebelled against the strict discipline. 2 girls tried to set their dormitory on fire. Others tried to run away. In the summer of 1880, a group of Sioux chiefs made the 4-day train journey to Carlisle. The sight of their boys dressed like American soldiers infuriated some of the chiefs. Pratt managed to calm them, but one, Chief Spotted Tail, decided to take his children with him back to the reservation. Still, the United States government continued to open other boarding schools. Soon, parents were no longer asked to send their children. They were forced. Those who refused were threatened with arrest, and by the early 1900s, tens of thousands of Native American children were enrolled in these boarding schools. Carlisle was one of the better ones, with rigorous classes and well-trained teachers. All of the schools enforced rules through harsh disciplinary measures. Children were strapped, that is, struck, for not speaking English or for being tardy. Outbreaks of tuberculosis and influenza spread easily in crowded dormitory. Hundreds died. Between worlds. Over the decades, Native Americans began to demand more rights. They wanted their children closer to home and attending schools that taught them to cherish their heritage, not to abandon it. One by one, the boarding schools were shut down. Carlisle closed in 1918. As for Luther Standing Bear, Carlisle altered his life forever. Like the majority of graduates, he returned to his reservation, where he no longer felt at home. "I was caught between 2 worlds," he wrote. After working in his father's business for a time, Luther Standing Bear left to star in a Wild West show, performing in front of white audiences as a savage Sioux Indian. Over the years, he would put his Carlisle education to good use, returning to run a school at Pine Ridge Reservation, near where he grew up. He became a well-known writer and a prominent voice for the rights of his people. Captain Pratt never did manage to kill the Indian within Luther Standing Bear. In some ways, you could say he made that Indian stronger.